The fire roared behind him. Daniel turned back into the smoke, knowing someone inside still needed him, a young Marine, a loyal German shepherd, and one act of courage that changed countless hearts forever. From the ashes of fear rose a story of faith, redemption, and the quiet miracles God still creates. Before we begin, share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of hope and faith. The wind howled through the frozen streets of Minneapolis, sweeping across rooftops coated in ice. Snowflakes drifted lazily in the dim light of dawn, their fragile descent breaking the silence of a city half asleep beneath the weight of winter. Inside a modest apartment on the edge of town, Daniel Walker stood by the frosted window, his breath forming small clouds in the air. He was 30, tall and broad-shouldered, with the solid frame of someone shaped by years of discipline. His face bore faint scars that no one ever asked about. The short brown hair was cropped neatly, the jawline sharp but softened by tired eyes that once scanned desert horizons and now stared into falling snow. A former U.S. Marine, Daniel carried himself with quiet precision, each movement deliberate, almost rehearsed. He'd returned from service 2 years ago, but part of him never came back. Behind him, a sound of claws tapped against the wooden floor. Shadow, a 7-year-old German shepherd with a dark coat streaked with tan, rose from his bed. His ears twitched as he approached Daniel, resting his massive head against his master's thigh. Shadow had once served as a military K-9, trained to detect explosives and read danger in the air. The scars on his left flank told stories no one spoke of. Yet his amber eyes were calm, patient, filled with the wisdom of a creature that had seen too much and survived anyway. Daniel crouched down, scratching the dog's neck. "Another morning, buddy," he murmured. Shadow's tail brushed against the floor once, slow and deliberate, like an old soldier's salute. They had a routine now. Every Saturday, Daniel and Shadow visited Lantern Haven, an animal shelter on the city's outskirts. The place was built of weathered red brick, its roof patched with sheets of corrugated metal that rattled whenever the wind screamed. It wasn't much to look at, but to Daniel, it was a kind of sanctuary, a battlefield of kindness where he could serve again in quieter ways. As Daniel tightened his worn leather gloves and stepped outside, the cold bit into his skin. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he walked to his old blue pickup truck. Shadow leaped into the passenger seat, breath fogging up the glass. Daniel smiled faintly. Yeah. You get shotgun as always." The drive was short, but the streets felt endless. Gray buildings, lifeless trees, a sky the color of steel. Somewhere between the hum of the engine and the hiss of tires on ice, Daniel's thoughts drifted back to Afghanistan, the sound of rotor blades, the heat of the sand, the moment his unit lost 2 men and 1 dog. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. War had left him with discipline and ghosts in equal measure. Lantern Haven appeared through the curtain of falling snow, its dim lights flickering behind frosted windows. Daniel parked, exhaled, and stepped into the cold once more. Shadow jumped down gracefully, landing with a soft thud. Together they crossed the slush-covered path to the entrance. Inside, warmth enveloped them. The smell of disinfectant mixed with wet fur and old hay. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A few volunteers waved as Daniel entered. "Morning, hero," called George, a retired postman in his 60s with a round face and a gray mustache. His laughter came easy, but his knees didn't. He leaned on a cane wrapped in duct tape, his eyes bright with mischief. "Morning, George," Daniel replied, hanging his coat. Still here keeping everyone in line? Somebody has to. George winked and pointed toward the kennels. They've been loud since dawn. Guess they knew you were coming. At the reception desk sat Sarah Miller, the shelter's director. She was in her late 50s, tall and lean, with silver hair tied neatly into a bun. Her skin had the kind of pale tone only winters in Minnesota could forge, and her blue eyes were sharp but kind. She wore a heavy cardigan, its sleeves dusted with dog fur, and her posture carried both exhaustion and quiet authority. "Daniel," she greeted, looking up from a pile of paperwork. "You're early today." "Couldn't sleep." Sarah studied him for a moment, her expression softening. "Still dreaming of the desert?" Daniel hesitated, then gave a faint smile. "Something like that." She nodded as if she understood more than he said. Sarah had lost her husband, a firefighter 20 years ago. People whispered that's why she'd started Lantern Haven, to keep saving lives, even if they had fur instead of faces. "You know where to find the leashes," she said gently, "and the coffee's still terrible." He chuckled. "Wouldn't have it any other way." Daniel moved down the narrow hallway, the hum of barking dogs echoing around him. He paused by each cage, greeting its occupants. Small terriers wagging tails, a one-eyed pit bull named Gus, an elderly golden retriever that barely lifted its head. He talked to each one softly, his voice steady and low. Shadow followed, pausing now and then to sniff through the bars. The other dogs recognized him. Some barked in excitement, others bowed their heads respectfully, as if aware he wasn't just another visitor. Halfway through the row, Daniel knelt beside a cage holding a thin brown hound. "You'll get out soon, pal," he murmured. "Just need the right person." The hound licked his fingers through the wire. Behind him, Sarah appeared, folding her arms. "You have a way with them, Daniel. Even the scared ones calm down when you're around." He shrugged. Maybe they see another stray. Her smile faded at the honesty in his tone. "You're not a stray, son. You just haven't found your next mission yet." For a moment, he didn't reply. Then he stood, brushing snow from his boots. "Maybe my mission is just to make sure they get a better life." As he spoke, the shelter door rattled from the wind. The lights flickered briefly, and Shadow's ears perked up. Outside, snow was falling harder, and the sky turned the color of lead. The afternoon passed quickly. Daniel cleaned cages, carried sacks of kibble, fixed a broken latch. Every task was done with soldierly focus. Sarah watched him from her office window, her heart heavy with something like gratitude and worry. She'd seen veterans come and go. Some stayed to help, some disappeared after one visit, unable to face reminders of rescue and failure. But Daniel was different. His pain didn't make him bitter. It made him kind. When evening came, the wind eased, the shelter quieted, only the sound of breathing and distant whimpers remained. Daniel sat on a stool sipping lukewarm coffee. Shadow lay beside him, chin on paws, eyes half closed. He stared at the rows of cages, at all the creatures waiting behind metal bars, and wondered if he was really any freer than they were. Freedom, he thought, wasn't just about open doors. It was about peace. And that he hadn't found yet. Sarah's voice broke the silence. "Lock up when you're done, Daniel, and thank you for everything." He nodded without looking up. "Good night, Sarah." When the last light flicked off, Daniel stood in the dim glow of the exit sign. Shadow nudged his hand, and he smiled faintly. "Come on, old man. Let's go home." Outside, the snow had stopped. The air was cold, but still. The city hushed under its white blanket. Daniel paused, looking back at the shelter, the faint light spilling through its windows. Somewhere inside, he thought he heard a low growl echo from the farthest corner, deep and sorrowful. It was a sound that didn't belong to any of the dogs he knew. He frowned, unaware that behind those locked doors lay a story that would change his life. The corridors of Lantern Haven echoed with the restless music of barking and claws striking metal. The scent of disinfectant mixed with straw, forming a strangely comforting aroma of life barely holding on. Daniel Walker moved slowly down the narrow hallway, his boots scuffing against the worn linoleum, while Shadow padded silently beside him, the dog's ears pricked but calm. The overhead lights flickered occasionally, and somewhere far off, wind rattled the old windows. It was another ordinary day in a place that existed between hope and despair. At his side walked Mary Thompson, a woman in her early 50s with streaks of silver in her short brown hair and sharp green eyes behind rimless glasses. Her face carried lines carved not by vanity or age but by fatigue, a soft exhaustion that came from years of fighting for things that could not thank her. She had worked in animal rescue for nearly 2 decades, ever since losing her husband in a factory accident. Where grief once lived, purpose had taken its place, though sometimes that purpose weighed heavier than sorrow ever did. She moved briskly, clutching a clipboard against her chest, her parka zipped high around her neck. "These dogs," Mary said, glancing at the kennels as they passed. "Most of them were thrown out, beaten, or just forgotten. They all have battle scars, like you, I think." Daniel smiled faintly, kneeling by a small mixed-breed pup that wagged its tail through the bars. "Different wars, same wounds," he murmured. Mary gave him a sidelong look. "That's exactly it." They walked until the bright hallway faded into shadow. The last row of cages looked older, the air colder here, the light weaker. At the far end stood a pen unlike the others, its metal thicker, the locks doubled, a warning sign in red bolted to the door. "Caution, do not approach." Mary stopped and exhaled slowly. "This is Bruno." Daniel looked inside. The cage was dimly lit by a single bulb overhead. A massive German shepherd lay in the back corner, its coat rough, patches of fur missing near the shoulders. The dog's frame was powerful, easily over 90 pounds, but the stillness of its body spoke of exhaustion rather than rest. Across its muzzle ran a long scar, pale and raised against the dark fur. Its eyes, amber-edged with gold, watched them from the gloom, unblinking. "He was a police K-9, Mary said quietly. "Served with the city for 5 years. Took a bullet once, saved 2 officers. But something happened a year ago during a raid. His handler didn't make it out. Bruno hasn't trusted anyone since." As if on cue, Bruno rose, stiff and wary. The moment Daniel took one step closer, the air vibrated with a low growl. Then, like a flash, the dog lunged, teeth slamming against the bars, eyes wide with primal rage. The sound filled the corridor like a gunshot. 2 volunteers down the hall gasped and stepped back. Shadow tensed but didn't snarl. He merely straightened, his tail stiff, his gaze steady, a soldier recognizing another soldier in pain. Mary raised her voice over the chaos. "That's why we keep people away. He's bitten 3 handlers. We feed him through that small chute." She pointed to a narrow slot on the cage door. "Everyone says he's too far gone. Dangerous." Daniel didn't flinch. He studied the animal, noting the trembling in its front legs, the quick rhythm of its breathing. He'd seen that look before, in men cornered by their own memories. "He's not angry," he said softly. He's scared. Mary sighed. You're not the first to say that. But they all left after a week. The city wants to put him down. The paperwork's already on my desk. I just can't bring myself to sign it. Not yet. The hallway grew silent except for the distant hum of the furnace. Daniel's expression hardened, the kind of focus that came when he decided on something without words. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small biscuit, the kind Shadow loved. The dog beside him tilted his head as if questioning the decision. Easy, boy, Daniel whispered to both of them. He knelt, holding the treat in his palm, but didn't move closer. Bruno's growl softened into a low rumble, more uncertain than defiant. You see that? Daniel said under his breath. He's testing if we'll force him. Mary watched with uneasy admiration. You really don't scare easy, do you? He gave a small smile. You can't scare what's already been through hell. For a moment, Bruno stopped pacing. His gaze flicked to Shadow, then back to Daniel. In those few seconds, the wildness dulled, replaced by something else. Recognition, perhaps. But then the moment passed, and the growl returned. All right, Daniel said softly, rising to his feet. We'll start again tomorrow. Mary raised a brow. Tomorrow? Yeah, Daniel replied. You said everyone left. I don't plan to. That evening, as the volunteers prepared to close up, Daniel lingered near Bruno's cage. The shelter was quiet now, the lights dimmed to half. Shadow lay stretched along the wall, eyes open but calm. Mary watched from the office window, a mug of tea cradled in her hands. Bruno stood near the back of the cage again, tail twitching slightly. Daniel spoke in that low, even tone soldiers used when talking to frightened civilians. He told stories, small, simple things. How he and Shadow once spent 2 days trapped during a sandstorm. How he'd learned to find peace in silence. His voice filled the empty corridor like a heartbeat. The big dog didn't come closer, but the sound of his breathing slowed. His ears flicked forward, not in aggression, but in listening. When Daniel finally stood, brushing dust from his jeans, he noticed the faintest change. Bruno hadn't growled once in the last 5 minutes. Mary stepped out from the office. You really think you can reach him? Daniel smiled faintly. I don't know, but I owe him the effort. Every soldier deserves someone who doesn't give up. She nodded, something soft flickering in her eyes. I'll trust your judgment. Just don't get yourself bitten. As Daniel and Shadow left, the snow outside had thickened, swirling beneath the yellow streetlights. The air stung, sharp with winter's purity. Daniel glanced back at the shelter, its windows glowing faintly through the storm. Behind one of those panes, a pair of amber eyes watched him go. Inside, Bruno lay back down on the cold concrete, head resting on his paws. His breathing was steady now. Somewhere in the maze of his broken mind, a memory stirred. A human voice, calm and steady. Not ordering, not shouting, just staying. For the first time in a long while, Bruno didn't dream of gunfire. He dreamed of snow. Snow kept falling over Minneapolis that week, soft and relentless, blanketing the city in silence. The wind had a way of slipping through every crack in the old shelter's walls, carrying with it the scent of ice and the faraway hum of traffic. Inside Lantern Haven, the heaters buzzed weakly, fighting a losing battle against winter's persistence. It was in that fragile warmth that Daniel Walker began his new routine, one that no one quite understood, but everyone quietly respected. Mary Thompson, wrapped in a faded wool sweater, leaned against her office door as she watched Daniel from afar. His breath came in soft clouds as he scrubbed the floors near the last hallway. His movements were calm, deliberate, almost meditative. There was something in his stillness that spoke louder than words. He had asked to be in charge of the far section, the one most volunteers avoided. Mary had said no at first, 3 times in fact. But when she saw the way he looked toward Bruno's cage, like a soldier staring at an unfinished mission, she gave in. She had known men like him before, her late husband among them. Brave, stubborn, with eyes that had seen too much and still refused to look away. When Daniel smiled, it was the polite kind, but the corners of his eyes never joined in. He was the type who carried his grief like a medal, silently and with dignity. "Promise me one thing," she had said that morning, her tone serious. "Don't open that cage, and don't stick your hand near the bars. My heart isn't ready for another report." Daniel had chuckled. "You have my word, ma'am. I survived enemy fire. I'm not planning to die from a paperwork accident." Now, as evening settled, he knelt near Bruno's cage again. The light above flickered, casting long, trembling shadows across the floor. Shadow lay a few feet behind him, quiet as always, ears forward, eyes trained on Bruno. The bond between the 2 dogs was unspoken, one calm, one broken, yet both understood the silence of men who had seen war. At first, Bruno reacted like always. His muscles tensed, his teeth flashed, his growl deepened into a low, warning rumble. The sound vibrated through the metal bars, sharp and angry. Daniel didn't flinch. He simply stood his ground, his breath steady. "It's me again, buddy," he said softly. "Just wanted to talk. No orders, no leash." The dog's growl didn't stop, but it lost its edge. The sharp fury dulled into confusion, then fatigue. Bruno backed up a step, eyes fixed on the man's face, his tail twitching once. Day after day, Daniel repeated the same ritual. He'd arrive before the other volunteers, the snow still fresh on his jacket, and sit on the cold concrete floor opposite the cage. Sometimes he spoke, sometimes he didn't. When he did, he talked about the small absurdities of his Marine days, the drill sergeant who made them scrub the floor with toothbrushes, the rookie who tried to hide his candy bars from the lieutenant and failed spectacularly, the long nights when the desert wind sounded just like the sea. The morning Liam decided to take Rusty to the vet, the city was wrapped in a dull winter haze. Snowbanks hunched along the sides of the road like sleeping giants, and the sky was the same flat gray as his old Marine t-shirt under his jacket. Rusty lay curled on the passenger seat of the green pickup, paws tucked under his chest, ears flicking at every bump in the road. He was bigger now, his coat thicker and cleaner, the reddish-brown along his back catching what little light filtered through the clouds. But he still glanced at Liam every few minutes with that mixture of trust and uncertainty, as if afraid this drive would end in another place of cages and echoes. Liam reached over once at a red light, letting his hand rest briefly between the dog's ears. "Just a checkup, buddy," he said. "Nothing scary, I promise." Rusty leaned into the touch for a heartbeat, then returned his gaze to the window, watching the world slide by in shades of white and gray. The veterinary clinic sat on the edge of a residential neighborhood, a small brick building with chipped paint on the sign and an old maple tree out front, its branches bare against the sky. A faded wooden board read, "Riverside Animal Care," in letters that had once been bright blue. The parking lot was half covered in packed snow, the kind that had melted and refrozen too many times. Liam parked, took a steadying breath he would never admit he needed, and opened the door. Rusty hopped down carefully, his paws slipping for a second on the icy ground before he found his balance. Inside, the clinic smelled of antiseptic, dry kibble, and coffee gone slightly bitter on a warm plate. A small bell above the door jingled as they entered. Behind the front counter stood Dr. Eleanor Harris, the clinic's lead veterinarian. She was in her mid-40s, with soft gray threaded through her dark brown hair, which she wore in a loose ponytail that escaped in stubborn strands around her face. Her skin was fair and lightly freckled, and there were fine lines at the corners of her green eyes that spoke of years spent squinting at charts and comforting anxious owners. Her figure was neither thin nor heavy, simply solid, dependable, like the oak desk she stood behind. She had the kind of calm presence that made animals lean toward her, and people exhale without realizing they'd been holding their breath. Life had hardened her in some ways. There had been a divorce years back, and a car accident that had taken one of her own dogs. But instead of making her bitter, those losses had given her an extra softness when she touched a trembling animal. "You must be Liam," she said, offering a warm smile that crinkled her eyes. "And this handsome boy is Rusty?" Rusty hesitated, then took a cautious step forward, nose twitching. Dr. Harris knelt down slowly, turning her body sideways instead of head-on, making herself smaller and less threatening. "Hey there, sweetheart," she murmured, letting him sniff the back of her hand before she dared reach for his neck. "You've got good eyes. Smart eyes." Liam watched the way Rusty's muscles loosened just a fraction. He nodded. "He's been through some stuff," Liam said quietly. "But he's trying." In the exam room, the light was bright, but not harsh. A poster of different dog breeds hung crooked on the wall. Rusty stood on the metal table, claws clicking nervously as he shifted his weight. But he stayed because Liam's hand stayed on his shoulder. Dr. Harris moved around him with practiced efficiency, checking his teeth, his ears, his heartbeat. "He looks under a year old," she said, her tone thoughtful. 4, maybe 5 months when he came to you. Good weight now. Lungs sound clear. Someone's taking care of him." Liam shrugged, but there was a faint flicker of pride in his eyes. "He's doing most of the work." Then she picked up a handheld scanner, its small screen blank, and passed it slowly over the back of Rusty's neck. The device gave a sharp, clear beep. Rusty flinched at the sound, but it was Liam who really reacted. His shoulders straightened, his eyes narrowing. "He's chipped?" Liam asked. "Yes," Dr. Harris said, frowning slightly. She turned the scanner, reading the screen. The frown deepened. "That's odd." She moved to a nearby computer, typing in the number displayed. On the monitor, a line of text appeared, a string of numbers and letters without any name, address, or phone number. Just one clear designation: K9 M47. "Most pets have the owner's contact info," she explained, glancing back at Liam. "This format, it doesn't match standard civilian registries. I've only seen something like this a few times. Military programs, maybe specialized law enforcement. Dogs trained for more than fetch and stay." She spoke carefully, weighing each word. Liam felt the room tilt slightly. Images flashed through his mind. Rusty bringing him tools in the garage, freezing when sirens wailed on the distant highway, positioning himself between the door and Liam whenever someone knocked. All those behaviors he had chalked up to sharp instincts and a rough past now rearranged themselves into a pattern that made far too much sense. "So he's not just a stray," Liam said slowly. "He's something else." Dr. Harris rested a gentle hand on Rusty's shoulder. "Whatever his past, he's yours now," she said. "But I'm required to log this code and send it to the central database. It might bounce back nothing. It might not. Just be prepared in case someone comes looking. On the drive home, the heater wheezed and the radio played low, but all Liam heard in his head were four characters repeating over and over. K9, M47. Rusty slept with his head against Liam's leg, trusting the road to take them somewhere safe. Liam kept one hand on the wheel and one close enough to feel the dog's warmth, trying to push back the unease that rode with him like another unseen passenger. That evening, snow tapped against the kitchen window as Liam poured hot water over a tea bag, watching the steam rise and twist. Rusty lay on the rug nearby, paws folded, eyes half closed. The phone buzzed on the countertop, screen flashing an unknown number. His stomach tightened the way it used to when the satellite phone rang in camp. He hit answer. Liam Walker speaking. The voice on the other end was male, somewhere in his 50s, clipped but not unkind, carrying that clear, trained tone he recognized from briefings. Mr. Walker, this is Captain James Harlow with the National K9 Recovery Program. Your veterinarian forwarded a microchip code, K9M47. I'd like to talk to you about your dog. Liam's gaze slid automatically to Rusty. The pup had lifted his head now, ears pricked, reading his handler like a map. Yeah, Liam said quietly. I'm listening. Harlow exhaled slowly, the sound soft but heavy. That dog is not a typical shelter case, Mr. Walker. K9M47 is registered to a special training initiative. 6 months ago, he was part of an early K9 imprinting program. Puppies bred and conditioned from birth for advanced detection and search work. His file goes cold during a raid in Montana. There was an illegal facility, a lot of chaos. His mother, a K9 named Nova, died in the line of duty protecting her handler, Sergeant Daniel Brooks. Only one pup from her litter survived. That pup was M47. According to our records, he disappeared in the aftermath. Liam's fingers tightened around the edge of the counter until his knuckles paled. He pictured a German shepherd like Rusty, full-grown, lunging into danger to shield a man. He could see the battlefield without needing details. Smoke, screaming, sirens, the kind of noise that shakes bones apart. He looked at the young dog on his floor, suddenly seeing not just a rescue, but a legacy. So, Rusty, his voice came out rough, almost reverent. He's Nova's pup. Yes, Harlow confirmed. Nova was one of our finest. Sergeant Brooks owes his life to her. He's carried a lot of guilt about the missing pup. We all assumed M47 died that day. Clearly we were wrong. Liam swallowed, a strange mixture of pride and sorrow rising in his chest. He's been through hell, he said softly. You should know that much. Harlow's tone gentled. I don't doubt it, Mr. Walker. For now, we just wanted to confirm his status and make contact. You're not in trouble. You did the right thing taking him in. After the call ended, the house felt too quiet. Liam stood at the window, watching the wind shove snow into swirling ghosts. Behind him, Rusty padded over and pressed his head against Liam's thigh, sensing turbulence he could not name. Liam laid a hand on his neck, fingers brushing the scarred circle beneath the fur. Your mom was a hero, he murmured. Guess it runs in the family. Several nights passed, each one restless. Liam lay awake listening to Rusty's breathing beside the bed, thinking about Nova, about Sergeant Brooks, about dogs who were born with a job wired into their bones. He thought about Scout, too, about the weight of a dog's last act being to save you. It was a debt you never really paid off. He wondered if keeping Rusty as a house dog in a small cabin was honoring that legacy or betraying it. A few days later, his phone rang again. This time the voice was female, firm yet warm, like someone used to delivering difficult news with a human touch. "Mr. Walker, my name is Agent Caroline Miller. I'm with the National K-9 program, working in conjunction with Captain Harlow. We've reviewed the scan data and the report from your vet. There's no doubt. Your Rusty is K9M47, Nova's pup." Liam sat at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee cooling in his hands. Across from him, Rusty lay with his head on Liam's boot, eyes closed but ears alert. "I figured as much," Liam said. "What does that mean for him?" Agent Miller paused, choosing her words. "Dogs like him are rare, Mr. Walker. His instincts, his bloodline, the early imprinting he received, all of that makes him an exceptional candidate. With proper training, he could save lives. Search and rescue, disaster response, maybe even law enforcement support. We'd like to offer to bring him back into the program. With your cooperation, of course." The word "bring him back" landed like ice. Liam looked down. Rusty had opened his eyes and was staring straight at him, as if he could hear every word. The dog's gaze was steady, trusting, the kind of look that said, "Wherever you go, I go." Liam's chest tightened. "So you want to take him?" he said, his voice flat. "We want to evaluate him," Miller replied gently. "Ultimately, we hope he can return to service. Nova gave everything to protect her handler. Her son could carry that torch forward. I won't pretend it's easy work, but it matters." Liam stood, walking to the back door. He stepped out onto the small porch, cold air hitting his face. Rusty followed, sitting so close their sides almost touched. The sky was clear now, stars sharp above the bare branches. Liam's breath came out in white bursts. He thought of the people he'd seen rescued because a dog found them in smoke or snow. He also thought of Scout's last breath, the way his body had gone limp in his arms. He knew what duty cost. He knew what it cost the ones left behind. "I understand what you're asking," he said quietly into the phone. "I respect it. But Rusty, he already survived one battlefield, whether you call it that or not. He's just now learning that a slammed door doesn't mean pain, that a hand doesn't always hurt." His fingers sank into the fur along Rusty's neck, and the dog leaned closer with a soft sigh. "They tell me he was born for big things," Liam continued. "Maybe that's true. But the biggest thing I can give him right now is a life where he doesn't have to be afraid to sleep." There was a silence on the line, filled only by the faint crackle of distance. When Agent Miller spoke again, her voice was softer. "So your answer is no." Liam looked down at the dog pressed against his leg, at the faint outline of scars hidden beneath winter fur, and felt the decision settle like a weight he was willing to carry. "My answer," he said, "is that Rusty stays home. If he saves anyone again, it'll be because he was in the right place at the right time, not because someone sent him into another fire. He's done enough." Another pause, then a small exhale that sounded almost like respect. "Understood, Mr. Walker," she said. "We won't push further. Take good care of him. After what Nova did for us, we owe her that much." The call ended. Liam slipped the phone into his pocket and sat on the top step of the porch. Snow crunched softly under Rusty's paws as the pup turned, then settled with his head on Liam's knee. The night was cold, but there was warmth right there, in the shared breath of man and dog. Liam stared out over the quiet street, knowing that somewhere out there, a retired sergeant named Brooks still carried the memory of a brave dog named Nova, and that in this small house at the edge of the city, her son had been offered a different kind of future. Rusty was no longer just K9M47, a line in a file. He was a survivor, a promise, a second chance. And as the winter wind moved through the trees, Liam Walker chose to keep him not as a weapon, but as family, letting the legacy of heroes rest for now in the soft rhythm of a dog sleeping safely at his side. The snow had stopped falling 3 days ago, but Minneapolis still wore winter like an old coat that refused to be shed. The streets glimmered under a weak morning sun, and the air carried that distinct stillness that comes after tragedy has already burned itself out. It had been 1 week since the fire. What remained now was smoke-stained brick, blackened timber, and the quiet resilience of those who survived. For Daniel Walker, recovery wasn't about wounds or medals. It was about mornings like this. He walked down the familiar street toward Lantern Haven, a faint limp in his step and a lingering cough that refused to leave. His right hand was bandaged where he'd torn the skin, helping the Parkers through the burning hallway. Yet he walked upright, the same way he had once marched through deserts and battlefields, with purpose, even when tired. Shadow trotted at his side, the cold glinting off his thick coat. The old German shepherd moved with measured confidence, his head high, tail swinging lazily behind. The burn marks on his left paw had already begun to fade, but Daniel still checked it every night. Shadow, for his part, tolerated the attention with the patience of a saint. When they reached Lantern Haven, the shelter was already alive with sound. Dogs barked, volunteers shouted greetings, and the morning light spilled through frosted windows, casting a golden haze across the hallway. Mary Thompson stood by the front desk, her wool scarf wrapped tight around her neck. Her tired face broke into a wide grin when she saw him. "Daniel," she exclaimed, waving a tablet in her hand. "You're on the news again." Daniel frowned with mock seriousness. "That's never good. Usually means I'm in trouble." Mary rolled her eyes and held out the tablet. On the screen was a local news segment titled, "Marine and his faithful dog save elderly couple in apartment fire." The image that filled the frame was unmistakable. Daniel sitting on the snowy curb, his arm around the trembling Mr. and Mrs. Parker, while Shadow stood guard behind them, his muzzle streaked with soot, his eyes bright and fierce. The camera had caught the moment just as a firefighter draped a blanket over Daniel's shoulders. The voiceover played faintly. A story of courage and loyalty that melted the frozen hearts of Minneapolis this winter. Daniel let out a soft chuckle. "Looks like Shadow's the celebrity, not me." Mary smiled warmly. "People are calling him a hero. I've had 3 calls from schools asking if you'd bring him in to meet the kids." He scratched Shadow's ear. "You hear that, buddy? Career change. Motivational speaker." Their laughter was interrupted by a deep bark echoing from the far end of the corridor. Both turned instinctively. The sound came again. Low, steady, familiar. Bruno. Daniel's expression softened. "He's awake." They walked together down the long hallway. As they neared the final row, Bruno stood, inside his cage, tall and steady, his fur gleaming faintly in the morning light. His golden brown eyes were alert, not hostile. He didn't growl this time. Instead, he took a step closer to the bars, his tail flicking once cautiously. Daniel crouched a few feet away. Shadow sat beside him, head tilted. "Morning, soldier," Daniel said quietly. "You heard about the fire, huh?" Bruno's gaze shifted between Daniel and Shadow. Then, very slowly, he pressed his forehead against the cold metal. Mary's hand flew to her chest. "He's never done that with anyone else." Daniel reached out, not to touch, but to rest his palm flat on the air between them. "Guess he's ready," he murmured. He just needed to remember what trust looks like. A week later, after much hesitation and paperwork, Mary called Daniel into her office. The old woman sat behind her cluttered desk, the morning light revealing strands of silver in her hair. "I've decided," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Bruno's coming home. With you." Daniel blinked. "You're serious?" Mary nodded. "He needs structure, routine, someone who understands scars. And you, well, you seem to collect them." Daniel laughed softly. "That's one way to put it." The following morning, Minneapolis awoke to one of those rare days when winter sunlight gleamed clean and sharp, as if polishing the world for spring. Bruno stepped out of Lantern Haven for the first time in over a year. A soft leather leash hung loose in Daniel's hand. Shadow walked on the other side, calm and steady, like an older brother leading a newcomer. Bruno hesitated at the doorway, nostrils flaring. He sniffed the air, the scent of snow, distant pine, and something unfamiliar yet gentle. Freedom. His paws sank slightly into the snow as he stepped forward. Daniel knelt and whispered, "It's all right. You're safe now." They didn't go far that first day. Just a quiet walk down the street, the sound of boots and paws breaking through the snow. Passers-by turned to look at the trio. 2 dogs, 1 man, moving together like a small platoon of survivors. That evening, Daniel brought Bruno to his apartment. The building had been repaired since the fire, its charred walls scrubbed clean. Inside, the room glowed with warmth from the fireplace. Mr. and Mrs. Parker were there, seated on the couch under a wool blanket, each holding a cup of steaming tea. When Bruno entered, Mabel Parker gasped softly. "Oh my," she whispered. "He's beautiful." Bruno, uncertain, stayed near the doorway. His tail twitched nervously. Shadow walked up beside him and bumped his shoulder gently, as if to say, "You're home now." Within minutes, the room settled into a peaceful rhythm. Shadow lay at Daniel's feet, while Bruno curled near the fireplace, eyes half closed. The flickering flames painted their fur in shades of gold and amber. Mary arrived later with a small envelope in her coat pocket. "You might want to see this," she said, handing it to Daniel. Inside was a letter from the local news station. They wanted to film a short interview for a segment titled "The Soldier and the 2 Shepherds." Daniel smiled. "Sounds dramatic." Mary shrugged, a spark of pride lighting her tired eyes. "People need stories like this, Daniel. They need to remember that redemption isn't just for people." He looked around the room, at the Parkers' quiet smiles, at Shadow's calm gaze, at Bruno's slow, peaceful breathing. "Maybe they're right," he said softly. "Maybe second chances are the closest thing to miracles we get." The next day, the interview aired across Minnesota. The closing shot was simple. Daniel sitting on his porch, Shadow resting at his side, Bruno lying close by. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the air. Daniel's voice carried through the screen, steady, gentle, honest. "War, fire, loss, they don't end us," he said. "They remind us how much light a soul can hold, even after everything burns." And somewhere, far from the noise of cities and wars, an old woman watching from her living room wiped her tears, smiled, and whispered, "God bless the soldier and his dogs. Sometimes, miracles don't come with thunder or bright light from the sky. Sometimes, they come quietly, in the shape of a scarred Marine, a loyal dog, or a broken soul learning to love again. Because when we choose kindness, when we reach out even to what the world calls lost, that's when God moves. Not above us, but through us. So if this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it. Leave a comment, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the quiet miracles that still happen every day. May God bless you, your loved ones, and every soul, human or animal, still searching for a little light after winter.